National Fishermen and Pacific Marine Expo are proud supporters of the Galley Stories podcast, as we make similar efforts to highlight the people and topics that define commercial fishing. You can see what that looks like in print and online all year long, as well as every November in Seattle when this community comes together at PME. Check out nationalfisherman.com and pacificmarineexpo.com to learn more.
Hello and welcome to Galley Stories, stories of the Bering Sea and beyond, hosted by Mark Kaler. My name is Penka Jane, podcast deckhand and longtime listener. We'd thank you to subscribe to the podcast and leave us a review. Here's today's catch.
Hello guys, welcome back to another installment of Galley Stories, stories of Bering Sea and beyond. I am your host, Mark Kaler. And today we have Captain Garry Wiggins with us. How you doing today, Garry?
Oh, fine, thank you.
Garry, where were you born? What year?
I was born in Anacortes on the island in 1934. Graduated from high school in 53. And first year I went to commercial fishing was in 1951. I went to Kodiak, I was 17. And I started fishing with my dad when I was 10 on the Donald Lee gillnet boat, and stayed with him until he started managing Dungeness Crab Company in Anacortes. And then I just grew up around the waterfront, and I was helping the seiners tar their nets in the spring down where Safeway is now, and Tony Syrian come up to me. He says, "Hey kid," he says, "you want to go to Kodiak?" And boy, he stumped me, and I said, "Okay." So that started it all, and there was an armada then. It was a PAF fleet going to Alatac, and it all started in Anacortes. All the boats came to Anacortes, all the PAFCO boats, and I went on the St. Francis with Jack Zitko and to Kodiak, and then Tony was there. We had a new boat built, PAF, I think it was the 17, and a smaller boat. Pocket seiner, you might say, and I fished with him that year. And there was very few fish around Kodiak. In the middle of the season, we went up to Cook Inlet, and Snug Harbor Packing Company gave us some gill nets, so we gill netted Cook Inlet for a couple of weeks, and then we went back to Kodiak and finished the season. Then I got on the PAFCO 13 with the Andriches, and fished with them. Lee Andrich and I were in the skiff together, and then we went to Southeast Alaska, and we fished for about a month, and it was good fishing, so the season ended up pretty good.
What was your role on the boat? You're a 17-year-old kid.
Oh, I was a sucker. It's, hey kid, do this, hey kid, do that, Geez, I remember down Tebenkoff Bay, we'd fish hard all day, and then after we unload, we'd eat dinner, and then I had to do the dishes. Everybody else went to bed, and it was a tough deal, but made it.
And this was in the 50s, early 50s?
That was in 1951.
And what, was it a wooden boat?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And what was an average day like for you?
Day?
Yeah.
Oh, well, we just fish all day. We'd set after set. And in those days, we had those heavy tarred cotton nets, and we always pulled all the corks on the stern and in the skiff. So, and then we'd go up on deck and with a turntable and pull by hand, and it was tough deal in those days. We didn't have any power in the skiff and hardly any on deck. It was if you pulled through that era, you were okay.
So where'd you go from there?
I kept fishing every year. I fished until 1966. So the next year I went on Reefer King, and we went to Bristol Bay, and Jack Lohman from Anacortes, a very prominent family here in the fisheries. He was the skipper on there, and we had really a good season. We had 6 boats on deck. 4 of them were converted sailboats, and that was actually the first year that they really got into the conversions. And of course, they were sailboats. And we had, ours had 2-cylinder listers that you cranked by hand, and no power on the stern, of course. And then I went back in 53. The next year I went back on the Reefer King. And then when I got down to Puget Sound, I went on the Hollywood seining with Boris. In 54, I left real early. I had a skiff deal in Cordova, and we fished the flats there for, I don't know, maybe a month. And we had it all laid out for the season. So I flew from there to Port Moller, and I met Boris there, and we each had a boat for PAF, and we fished the Bear River, Sandy River area, and in the meantime I lined up a Park 7 from Parks Canning Company in Kodiak to finish the season off. So
what's a Park 7?
Park 7 was the name of the little seine boat.
Oh, okay.
And so I lined the crew up in Port Moller before we left, and it was the Meyer brothers, like Jake and Junebug, and they both had airplanes. So we flew at the end of the season, we flew up to Igigik, and then from Igigik we flew up to Lake Iliamna, and then we stopped and refueled. And then, like crazy young guys that we were, we flew across Wide Bay and across Shelikof Straits and landed at Karluk on Kodiak. And that was really tough because that beach is pretty rough. And then we went down to Uyak to Parks Cannery, and we actually got there too late. There wasn't hardly any fish left. So after that, they flew back to Port Moller, and I went to Anacortes, and my dad told me, he says, you better get on a boat. He said, there's a lot of fish on Puget Sound, sockeye. So I got on the fleet, and boy, oh boy, we did good for a couple of weeks. There was lots of fish. And so 55, and I'd saved up some money, and I'd been going to college in the meantime. I had a scholarship to go to Skagit Valley, play baseball, and so then I had enough money saved up that I bought a farm up on Cedarville, 80 acres, and I always wanted to farm, so I wanted to try that, and it didn't turn out good. I mean, I was making a living, but it was tough. And then one day I was up and working up on the field, and somebody knocked on the door and offered me a full scholarship to go to Washington State to play baseball. So at the end of the year we sold out everything and went to Pullman and got on the baseball team. That was a scary deal because the first day, we didn't be in the uniform throwing the ball around for a while, and then we go in the pavilion there, and Buck Bailey was the coach, and he had a batting cage out of salmon net set up, and I'd never heard of it. So I go in there. I'm so nervous I couldn't even hardly hit the ball. Anyway.
What position did you play?
Center field, And so in the spring, I just knew I was going to be, I think they were leading in the Pacific Coast Conference at the time, and I knew that I'd be sitting on the bench for 3 years. I just felt that way. So I joined the rodeo team and rodeoed for Washington State that spring. And then I called.
Does that still exist? Do they still have a rodeo team?
I think they do. It was a good conference with Cal Poly, Oregon State, Idaho, and that was about. I'm not sure. I'm just not sure about that.
What made you join the rodeo team?
Well, I was born a horse lover, and I've always had horses. Thanks to my grandparents, because they had a little farm on the south end of town, and they always kept a horse for me. And throughout my life, I've had, probably a couple hundred head of horses. We raised horses commercially for a number of years. And just before I was offered the job to go to Kodiak, I was 17. I had in mind I was going to be a rodeo cowboy. And I had roped some calves, and I was doing pretty good. But when I got back, I had a pocket full of money, and all my friends that were rodeoing were all broke. So I said, I better change my mind here a little bit. Mm-hmm. So I kept fishing all the years. And when I got back from Washington State, I'd called Jim at Sebastian Stewart and asked him if they had a seine boat I could run on the Sound. And by golly, in a couple of weeks, he said, yeah, you can take the Mars. And I was all excited, so I got some of my friends, a couple of more football players for the Cougars, and we put a crew together, all young guys, and we were high boat on Puget Sound that year. We got lucky, got some couple big catches.
Was that salmon?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And
what was the price back then?
Oh God, I can't. Now you're taxing me.
Uh huh.
I can't remember. I can't remember.
Do you remember what minimum wage was back then?
No. No. So after that winter, I went dragging off the coast on a boat from Bellingham, and then I stayed with it. The next year, I fished the LH for New England Fish Company. Went fished Southeastern and Puget Sound. And that winter, I gone on with Dan Lukita in Seattle and fished on one of his draggers, and fished off the coast, and then next year I wanted to try out drum seining. So the Far West had a little boat, the Don't Worry, and they just converted it to a drum seiner. So I took that, and that was the big sockeye year, 58, lots of fish. I don't know, I couldn't hold them. We just didn't do that good. But at the end of the season, we put everything away. They announced they were going to have an opening at Point Roberts on the line up there for the Fraser River fish. And so I got a quick crew to get a bunch of old guys that I knew around town. But then I went up there, and boy, I tell you, one set we got a load. Really, there was so much fish there. And
how much could you pack?
I think we got about 25,000 pounds. Mm-hmm. And so then, get my years straight here. Then the next summer I went to Naked and ran the Aussie R in Southeast Alaska, and then in the summer, then the fall, they said, "You want to run the Dream Maid?" And I said, "Yeah." So I took the Dream Maid, and we fished fall here and up inside the pass, and then I had a herring net too, and so we put our herring seine on and fished herring that winter, and we fished there was herring quite, all over the sound. We even got a load one time out of Open Bay over in Henry Island, and mainly fished Liza Island up by Bellingham and Waldron Island. But the year before that, actually, I fished herring too, and I had fished on I ran the Vigilant for Far West. But then after that, they closed the herring, and then I got into a partnership with a Yankee Maid with Ward's Cove, and fished 5 seasons, and I would drag in the wintertime and fish salmon in the summertime. We fished off the coast, fished up the Hecate Straits, and kept fishing year round there. Boy, but it was okay.
What were your back when you in the early days was offloading similar than it is now?
Oh no, now they're pumping everything.
Yeah, how was that offload?
Oh, we brailed, and they used to have on Puget Sound they had a fish box on a platform scale. The old where you slide the weight across. Mm-hmm. So we'd pitch off into that, and they'd weigh and then dump into the hole.
Did you have to pitch your own fish?
Yeah. Oh yeah. We'd pitch up on deck and then fish from deck up into the box, and it was fine.
Didn't know any better, right? That's just the way it was.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned the Reefer King, I think you said it was?
Yeah, Reefer King.
What kind of vessel was that?
That was a floating processor. We brine froze all the fish, and we kept the boats on deck.
That was my question about the boats on deck. You said 6 sailboats?
Yeah.
And those were actively fishing boats?
Yes. Yep. And Jack Lohman, the skipper on the Reefer King, had his own boat on there called the Hungry Jack. He's a famous guy. And so it worked out.
I'm just real curious how they were fishing with sailboats.
With sailboats? Mm-hmm. Oh my God! Those guys are so clever. There's old names like Swivelneck and all those guys. That the fearful thing when we were up, of course we were new in '52, but they said, be careful of the sandbars. You get stuck here, you'll probably drown. So then that was the fearful thing with those sailboats. Later on, when I was with Alaska Packers, I looked at some of those scows, and Norm Rockness was a real close friend of mine, and he was in charge of the Bristol Bay area for APA. Showed me those scows, and along the side, they had all these holes poked in the scows. And I said, well, what the heck's that for? He said, those sailboats, he said, if they had to hit the scow, bow on, and throw a line on. Because of the tide, there's a lot of tide up there, see, a lot of current. And he said, if they miss the scow, they're gone for a whole tide before they can come back to unload. So they'd hit the scow, and if they didn't hit the scow, they were gone sailing
with the current.
Yeah. So there were a lot of sailboats there in '52, and we had those little chunker listers. We could hardly buck the tide with them, but it was way better than a sailboat. And they were dependable. And it was fun, too.
So you've seen the industry change a lot.
Oh, I've seen it. I've seen it all. I've seen it from the bare minimum, because I grew up during the Depression, and grew up on the waterfront, so I've seen it all. I've seen the mountains and the valleys, and that's always the cycle of salmon. You know, you can go along and boy, it'll drop down to the valley and then come back, and yeah, very interesting. And
What's been your greatest experience fishing?
Oh boy. Well, I fished 88. I fished, I ran the All-American fishing king crab in the Bering Sea. We only had like 5 or 6 days to catch that quota in the middle of the winter. Bad weather, it was tough, and it was really tough. And that's probably we got 86,000 pounds. We were hoping we'd catch 100, but it's hard to do in that many days in really bad weather. So I imagine some of the guys might have caught 200,000. I don't know, but it was tough.
So when did you start crab fishing?
You know, when I was a kid going to school here, there was a boat that fished for my dad, fished Dungeness, the Pride, and Duke on the Pride. And on the weekends, he wanted to give his deckhands the weekends off. So when he did that, he'd ask me if I'd go with him. So I'd fish with him on the weekends, and it was a great experience. And then in '59, I took the Vigilant, rigged up. Whitney Fidalgo at the time put a shrimp plant into Seldovia. And so they needed a boat to go up there, and so I said I'd go, and we took the Vigilant, and she was rigged up for dragging, and we had like 2 new shrimp nets, and I took a regular drag net that you fish bottom fish with, luckily. So we get up there, and the fishing was good, and we caught more fish right away in a couple of days than they could handle at the plant. And it just didn't turn out good that way because that plant didn't operate efficiently. And so I put that fish net on, and we started dragging out and cooking it, and geez, we caught lots of king crab. And finally the fishing game came around, and so I think as a matter of record, we were the last boat in Alaska to ever fish for trawl for king crab. They closed the season there for dragging.
How was that?
Well,
I mean, I just can't imagine it. You know, it's all pots nowadays, right?
yeah. Well, luckily, because that trawling, you know, you could just wipe out the fishery. It's so effective. But so they didn't like that, and I don't blame them. So that was the end of trawling for king crab. And I think as a matter of record, you'll see that. 64 in the winter, I fished. We put tuna gear aboard, and we fished down from Columbia River all the way down into California, out in the warm water for albacore. And that was a fun thing.
How were you catching those?
We were trolling. They call it jigging, but we were trolling feathers, and I think we had 6 lines out. So
when you hook into one, you hand line it in, or how?
Yeah, short line, you know, but it was all hand line. Yeah. Put them on deck, let them cool off a little bit before we iced them, because they are a hot fish. That was a lot of fun. We didn't go back after that, though. So I was 65. Fellow that I knew in Seattle called me and he said, Bennigsen's looking for a skipper for the Fortress. And he says it's a pretty good deal for dragging for shrimp. So I said, okay. And so I got a crew together, the guys that drug with me. And we went to Kodiak and got on the Fortress and started dragging for shrimp. And all that winter, and then in the spring of '66, we had to wait in the boat harbor a couple of days for the rotation. There was 3-4 boats fishing, and Pete Marinkovich came down on the boat. He was the area manager for Alaska Packers. He came down on the boat and he says, "Are you going to be in here tomorrow?" And I said, "I think so." He says, "Come stop up the office. I want to talk to you for a while." And he was up in the Star of Kodiak. Mm-hmm. And so I went up there and he offered me the job to manage Larsen Bay Cannery. Was that a surprise? So I said, "Well, give me a trip to think about it." So we went out the next day and when we came back and I said, I'm getting tired of fishing year round. I said, I'll go for it. So 20 years in the canning, freezing business, Alaska Packers, and then I started an invention when I was in Larsen Bay on a salmon egg extractor, because we had all these girls pulling eggs and the Japanese were mumbling to me and the girls had all sore hands and they're mumbling about torn skeins, egg skeins. And so one day I take like 4 or 5 pinks, I put them in a bag and take them up to my house, and I got a paint roller and so I cut the heads off and held them by the tail and took the paint roller and rolled from the tail to the head cut and rolled everything out. Wow, how do I mechanize that? Mm-hmm. So I started working on that. So I left Kodiak and moved down to Seattle, and that was the end of the first part of '70. And I wouldn't have gone down, but I got tired of living in Kodiak years around, and they closed the crab season then. And I'm backing up a little bit, but when they closed the king crab fishery in Kodiak, we didn't have anything to do in the wintertime, and I was living there. So I told them, I said, if you transfer me to the Blaine office, like all the other managers, I said, I'll stay with the company. Otherwise, I'm going to leave because I don't want to live in Kodiak anymore year round. Well, they hum-hawed about it, and then somebody come up from San Francisco, Del Monte office, says, you can't quit this company. Nobody quits this company in your position. I said, I didn't pay much attention to that. So anyway, I left and went to Seattle to work on my invention. And finally I figured out the mechanics of it. And the fella close to me there in Woodway he was an architect design architect for Boeing. And so he helped me make all the patent drawings, and the ones you've seen on the wall were by him. And so I took him to a patent attorney there in Seattle, and they liked the drawings and submitted. So I got the patent, and I licensed the patent to Marco so that they could manufacture. I still own the patent, but I licensed them to manufacture, and they paid me royalties for 17 years. So it worked out really good. It was a real plus in my life.
They're all over, right?
Yeah, every cannery had one. And yeah, I've got patents, and I even got a patent in Russia, and they don't have to give anybody a patent. You know that yourself.
That's a hell of an accomplishment.
Oh, yeah.
Does it still pay off, or is it just, is it all sunset?
No, they pay 17 years the life of a patent. I had one in Norway and Canada and Japan, and I think I had 8 patents. It was a wonderful thing.
Quite an accomplishment.
Yeah, and that was during that time of managing canneries, and so in the meantime, whenever I could, I'd sneak off and go to a roping or a rodeo, and I always had quite a few horses. And if you see the name of that horse, that's Chum Salmon. Is that appropriate?
It is. I was just about to ask you, because, going through your house coming up here today, you've got a lot of rodeo stuff.
Yeah.
So you would sneak off in between?
I did, yeah. I'd go to they had rodeo at Anchorage at the ice arena downtown Anchorage, and so they called me and asked me if I was going to enter, and I said, yeah, I'll enter. So, and I knew I could borrow a horse. I knew a couple guys up there that had pretty good horses. So then they called back and asked me if I'd judge the rough stock events. I said, well, okay, I'm going to be there. So, and it was a good rodeo. All the stock came from Canada, and it was good. I didn't make any money there, but it was very good. And then I'd gone to Eagle River, and Kodiak always had a pretty good rodeo. And that was in Alaska. Down here, I've gone all over. I've roped all over. So it's been a great thing in my life, and I've had lots of really good horses. And I've been blessed with good health. I've been able to rope. And
looks like Chum Salmon there was a racehorse.
Yeah, he's a racehorse. He's a champion. And he's also in the Hall of Fame.
Oh.
About 10 years ago, they called, we were ranching in Kennewick. They called from Emerald Downs, said, we're going to induct Chum Salmon into the Hall of Fame for Long Acres and Emerald Downs. And we're inviting you to come down for the presentation, and which we did. It was really a big honor.
Sounds like you've had a pretty, like you said, due to good health, but it sounds like you've had a pretty blessed life.
Yeah, I really have. I've been so active that I've always had something going on. Mm-hmm. And
so what do you do nowadays?
Well,
because you still seem pretty active.
I don't do.
Or mobile anyway.
I'm kind of mobile, but I've got a good woman, and she helps a lot. So it's been a very good life.
What would you say is your biggest accomplishment in your life?
Well, probably that extractor, but otherwise managing those big companies and hundreds of employees, millions of dollars. It used to be so prestigious, to be a manager in Alaska. Especially with Del Monte, they had that old Alaska APA system, and they actually had a superintendent's manual. So if you ever had a problem, go to page 57 or what. Well, we have a guy who broke down, independent fisherman. There's no place in that superintendent's manual where I can help him. Mm-hmm. That type of thing. So
yeah.
It was, you just had to work your way through everything. Mm-hmm. And there was, naturally with that many people, there's a lot of problems too, You're everybody's mother for one thing. Mm-hmm. But, yeah, and I enjoyed Whitney Fidalgo a lot. There were some very, very good people there. ran the cannery, and I was in charge of 3 canneries, Uyak on Kodiak and Kodiak City and Port Graham. And then we had a buying station at Homer. We'd buy crab mainly. And it was good.
How did you meet your wife? With all this running around you were doing?
You know, after I got out of Alaska, I had a Coast Guard license for a number of years, and so I started running yachts. There's 2 charter companies in Anacortes, and so where they needed the license captain for certain tonnage, and so I went with them for 2 or 3 years, I guess, and I met her there. One day about 4:30, I walked by, and she had an office right in the corner of the building at Skyline out here. So I walked by, and she slides the window, and she says, "Hey, where are you going?" I looked at her kind of funny. I says, "I got to go feed my horse." "Oh, you haven't got a horse?" "Oh, yeah." So she wanted to go see my horse. So I took her. His name was Leroy. He's kind of a famous horse. I took her up there and showed her, and I don't know if she fell in love with me or the horse, but we finally got married, and it's been a wonderful, wonderful deal.
I saw in one of the pictures downstairs you showed me Jan was out riding with you moving cattle.
Yeah, she liked to ride, and we loved that's one thing we could do together was help people move cattle, and that was a pretty good sized river, that picture you saw. And we came to the river, and I had Don Dagnan owned the cattle, and I said, "Don," I said, "this horse I'm riding," I said, "he won't even touch a mud puddle." And he laughed. He says, "Oh, you got to get across. We got to get them all across that other pasture." And that's a wide river. Anyway, he had enough cow in him. He was only like 4 years old. So when we got up there, he's locked onto those cows, and he never even looked at that water. He just kept going, following those cows. And it was just amazing to me. And it worked out so good.
Won't even touch a mud puddle.
Yeah, he wouldn't either. He was spooky, but he locked onto those cows. He didn't care about anything else. It was his breeding. So one time we were raising a bunch of colts, and I had what am I going to name that filly? She's kind of flashy, and so I wrote a letter to the governor of the state of Washington, Dixie Lee Ray, and I said, "I've got a nice filly, and I'd like to name her after you." And she wrote back a real nice letter right away, and she said, "Oh, I'd be so honored." So I'll show you a picture of her, but we named her that. She won a couple races.
So where were you raising all these horses at?
Most of them Eastern Washington. We had a farm in Bow also, and we used to, and I had a thoroughbred operation for a while in Eastern Washington, like in 80, started in 80. I'd go to Kentucky and buy some mares, and like Chum Salmon, I bought his mother at the sale at Hollywood Park in California. Brought her up here and foaled her out. But that's the way it started, and I've had a lot of horses. One year, and I was working at Whitney Fidalgo about 6 o'clock in the morning. The phone rang, and I hadn't gotten up yet. Here's this agent that I'd known in Miami, and she says, "I found that horse you've been looking for all these years." And I thought, I just couldn't believe it. She said, "He's in Puerto Rico." His name was Holy War. So she said, "Here's their number." Ubaris, they had a big dairy farm there in Puerto Rico. So I called them up, and they said, "Yeah, he's for sale." So I got a partner. We each put in $40,000, went down there and bought him. And we had to put him in quarantine for 2 weeks. And then shipped him to Miami and then flew him from there to Los Angeles and put him on a local horse transportation on the coast here. And they brought him up to Whidbey Island to Wildwood Farm. And I syndicated him. I sold 40 shares at $5,000 a share. And we sold out. So we made a little money on that deal, but most of them you don't. It's pretty tough to make it.
How do you, I mean, an agent just calls you and says, I found the horse you've been looking for.
Yeah.
How did they know what you were looking for?
Oh, I've been talking to everybody because I follow the breeding, and when I go home at night, I had a library of breeding statistics and bloodlines, and I always, and he's the one I found. His brother, his name is Excipitor. He was a champion horse, and so finally it came up, and we bought him, and he did good up here.
So a lot of racing.
Yeah, a lot of racing. Yeah.
Have you seen that industry change a lot too? Like, have you seen the horse industry change a lot?
Yeah, it's just going downhill. The racetracks are closing. When they went to television, it was good for the track, but not good for the horsemen. The attendance dropped, except maybe for the Kentucky Derby, and that's such a party that they're totally full. But
how many of those have you been to?
I've been to Churchill Downs, but I haven't been to the Derby. I went there and had lunch one time. But I've been to a lot of racetracks.
Man, what a life.
Yeah. We had a couple horses run at Santa Anita. Here's a boat that I salvaged the spring of '66. It's the Madre de la Rosa.
How'd that go about? Or
Well,
how did that come about?
I had a weather report. I'd call Kodiak Airways every morning from Larson Bay and give them the weather. Everybody did along the island. And they said, well, beware. One of our pilots just called in and said that they saw a hull floating in Shelikof Straits off of Cape Uyak. So, geez, I run into the village. I got Buddy Carlson. He and I jumped on we had one tender there, and the Sea Lion. And so we took off, and we found that thing. There was only about 3 foot of the stern out of water. We were so lucky to find it. So we got a line and got it up to the tow winch, and we towed on that thing for like 20 hours to get it back into Larson Bay. And I towed it up as shallow as I could, and then we put a buoy in and let it sit there. And then finally salvage crew came in, and you see that picture, they brought it up to the dock. It was so loaded with crab pots. You see they're even on top of the house. And I think there was a terrible storm the day before, and that's what got them. But I think they tumbled. You can see the
bow.
Well, when I let go of her, I think it was bowed down, and I think it bounced a little bit. And
what about the crew?
Well, sadly, there were 4 bodies on there. And that's the sad, it's so sad because the skipper and his 2 sons were on there. And, to this day, nobody's ever thanked me for that. And it was a harrowing experience.
Can you tell us about it?
Well, I've kind of told you about it, but, the troopers came out right away, and then we were starting to get real busy in the cannery, and there she is right there. Yeah.
Is that going to be your worst day on the water?
Yeah, it might have been. Might have been. I never had any accidents, luckily enough. So nothing to talk about there. My son, we built the city of Seattle, that new boat, nice boat, and it was the opening, the crab season in Kodiak, and I was at the Pendleton Roundup, and my son was running the boat, and the announcer calls, would Garry Wiggins please come to the office? So what the heck's going on, you know? So I go up there and they say, we've got this call, and they want you to urgently answer it. So that was it. The boat had sunk, and luckily enough, the crew got off. And basically it was a structural flaw in the design. What they did, it was a 105-foot boat, and all the refrigeration was up in the bow. Of course, it's watertight, but and all the generators actually in the stern in the engine room. So there's a wireway, an 8-inch wireway that runs all the way to the bow. Well, somehow or another, one of the petcocks broke loose up there and flooded the bow. She starts going down, and then the water runs back through that wireway back to the engine room, and then starts to flood, and it kills the generators. And then eventually she sunk. The Coast Guard, luckily enough, were there to pick the crew up.
So your son and everybody was okay?
Yeah. And he was really handicapped. You know, he only had one leg, and those things happen fast. Yeah, it was bad. And I lost him when he was 44 years old. That was a terrible thing.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have anything else you'd like to share with us, Garry?
I don't know. I think that's probably about it. I know I've missed a few things, but that's
You've
not.
Sounds like an amazing life, Garry.
I've had an amazing life, yeah. So.
Okay.
I don't know.
Well, before we stop, let me thank you for salvaging this crew.
Oh yeah. Well, I appreciate that a lot. Yeah, it's a strange thing, you know, because, boy, we busted our ass to save that boat and the crew.
I never forget those kind of experiences either.
No, never. No, it's like it was yesterday.
Yeah.
But,
well, thanks for taking... Oh, go ahead.
In 95, so an agent here now, of course, asked me if I'd deliver a trawler to Port Isabel, Texas, and I did that, and that was a total venture.
Let's hear about that one.
Yeah, we left here, and there was
how big was it?
75-footer. Okay. There was 3 of us aboard, and we went to Ventura, California, and we fueled up there and then took off. And we got down into Mexico, and I could feel a little vibration. I thought, boy, maybe we picked up a Dungeness spot or something. So we pulled into Zihuatanejo, a little port there, and got a diver for $10. Went down, there was some buoy line in the wheel. Cut that out, and then they wouldn't let us leave.
They wouldn't let you leave?
No, and I said, what's your itinerary? I mean, they were after us. And they were probably suspicious of drugs or something. It's because the boat had a couple big tanks on deck, live tanks. Anyway, they went through everything, and we had to stay there an extra day and make phone calls. And if I'd have had an itinerary, you know, leaving Anacortes and describe the trip, we would have been okay.
You didn't know no logbook?
Well, I had a logbook, but they want to know where you're going and what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. So you finally got cleared to continue?
Yeah, and then we went into Panama, and we had to wait about 4 days to get through the canal, and finally we snugged up under a big freighter and got through there. In the meantime, I went up and asked them how difficult it would be to apply for a Panamanian license, Master Mariner. And so they went through and gave me a little preliminary test, and I had Coast Guard papers, so they respected that highly. So I delivered the boat to Texas, and on the way, there was some pirates came alongside, and we didn't know, and it was on the Pacific side. And they said, everybody kept telling me, on the other side, you're going to encounter some pirates. Well, lucky enough, I had a carbine with me. And so they're alongside and going like this. You got smokes or water, and the guys are waving at them. I said, don't do anything. So I put the gun up in the wheelhouse door, and then I pulled the VHF down like I'm calling somebody. So finally they left. And the funny thing was, when they left, they went out to sea. And we were probably 20 miles out at the time, and they went straight out and as far out of sight.
What size boat were they in? Like a skiff or something?
Yeah, like a 20-some foot skiff, 2 big outboards on it.
So they didn't have guns or anything? They were just...
Well, I don't know, but it really didn't. When they saw that gun we had, then they took off. But and then I told the guys, boy, at night, I said, we're going to have 2 guys on, one on the wheel and one watching the stern, because they can run up behind you in that wheel wash and step aboard. Mm-hmm. But we were clear from there.
That's a great story.
Yeah. And the only day of bad weather we had was going into Texas.
Oh, yeah?
It was blowing offshore, but it was real choppy. And we went up to Cayman Islands up by Cuba and all that way, and it was really good weather.
Excellent.
That was a great experience.
Sounds like it. Yeah. Except for the pirate part.
Yeah, that was scary. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
I've got that logbook here too.
I saw a picture of the Panamanian license.
Oh yeah. They finally issued that. I was skeptical, but they did.
Anything else you want to share?
I don't think so. I think that's about it.
Well, Garry, thanks for taking the time to tell us part of your story today.
It is a pleasure to talk to you.
Really, really good. And thanks to Relation Outerwear for our sponsorship and Extra Tough. I appreciate both of them supporting the show. So, Garry, thanks again.
You bet. My pleasure.
All right, guys, we will see you next time.
Okay.
Thanks for listening to Galley Stories. We hope you like what the net brought in. Please leave us a review on iTunes. Whether you like it or not, we're not fishing for compliments. Look us up on Facebook and Twitter too, and reach out to us at galleystories@gmail.com.